The Galactic Exhibition of Wonders and Terrors. The transport shuttle touched down on Soria's gleaming spaceport with a gentle hum, its passengers disembarking into a world that existed at the intersection of nature and technology. Towering crystalline structures stretched toward the amber sky, their surfaces reflecting the warm glow of Soria's twin suns. The air carried an exotic blend of ozone and something floral, a reminder that this was not Earth. Among the passengers stepping onto the platform was a figure that drew curious glances from the diverse crowd of galactic travelers. Keum appeared unremarkable by most standards, a human boy of 15 standard years, with dark hair that caught the light and eyes that held an unusual depth of calm. What made him stand out was not his appearance, but the way he moved, with a quiet confidence that seemed to harmonize with his surroundings rather than dominate them. He wore simple Earth clothing, practical and unadorned, with a small leather pouch hanging from his shoulder. To the casual observer, he might have been any young tourist visiting Soria's famous attractions. But Keum was far from ordinary. Raised in the ancient traditions of Earth's Druids, he possessed a gift that his family and elders had nurtured since childhood, an ability to connect with and calm even the most agitated creatures. The Galactic Fauna Exhibition loomed before him, a massive complex that sprawled across several kilometers of Soria's surface. Its bioluminescent walls pulsed gently, creating patterns that seemed to mimic the breathing of some enormous creature. Beings from dozens of species moved in and out of the entrance, tall, graceful Andromedans with their swan-like necks, hulking silicon-based tectons whose crystalline skin refracted light in rainbow patterns, and the ever-curious Centaurians with their multifaceted eyes that could see across several spectrums simultaneously. As Keum approached the entrance, he felt a familiar stirring in his chest, a sensation his teachers had described as the calling. It was the pull he felt whenever he was near creatures in distress, a gentle tugging that guided him toward those who needed his particular gift. Today, that pull was stronger than he had ever experienced. The exhibition's entrance hall was a marvel of engineering and artistry. Holographic displays showed the magnificent creatures housed within, each image rotating slowly to display every angle of their alien beauty. Information scrolled in multiple languages beneath each creature, describing their home worlds, their behaviors, and most prominently, their danger ratings. Keum paused at one particular display that made other visitors hurry past with nervous glances. The image showed a serpent of immense proportions, its scales a deep iridescent green that seemed to shift and shimmer even in the hologram. The creature's eyes held an intelligence that was both ancient and fierce, and when the image rotated to show its massive fangs, several younglings in the crowd pressed closer to their guardians. The text beneath read, "Carapus, the ancient poison serpent. Danger level, extreme. Native to the shadow worlds of Kepler, 442b. Length, up to 40 meters. Venom potency, single drop capable of neutralizing organic life within a 500-meter radius. Under no circumstances should visitors attempt to approach the containment barrier." Keum studied the display with growing interest, that strange pull in his chest intensifying. There was something about the creature's eyes in the hologram, beneath the fierce intelligence, he glimpsed something else. Pain. Loneliness. A wild spirit trapped behind barriers it could not comprehend. First time seeing a Carapus, young human. The voice belonged to a tall, elegant being with blue-tinged skin and silver markings that pulsed gently along her arms. She wore the uniform of an exhibition guide, and her expression held a mixture of amusement and concern as she noticed Keum's intense focus on the display. "Yes," Keum replied, though he couldn't tear his gaze away from the hologram. "It's magnificent." The guide's silver markings pulsed more rapidly, a sign of surprise in her species. Magnificent? That's not usually the word visitors use. Terrifying, perhaps. Nightmare-inducing. We've had several guests require medical attention just from viewing the display. Why is it here? Keum asked, finally turning to face her. So far from its home world. The guide's expression softened slightly, though her markings continued their rapid pulsing. The Carapus was brought here 5 cycles ago by a hunting expedition from the hegemony. They claimed it had been terrorizing shipping lanes near the shadow worlds. Rather than destroy it, the exhibition acquired it for study and display. She paused, glancing back at the hologram. It's been one of our most popular attractions, though few can stand to observe it for long. Keum nodded slowly, that pulling sensation in his chest now almost overwhelming. I'd like to see it. The real one. The guide's markings flashed a deep purple, alarm in her species' color language. Are you certain? We require all visitors to sign additional safety waivers, and the viewing time is limited to 10 minutes maximum. Some guests don't last even that long. I'm certain, Keum said with a gentle smile that seemed to calm the guide's agitation. I've come a very long way to be here. As they made their way through the exhibition's corridors, past enclosures containing creatures from 1,000 worlds, Keum felt that familiar sense of sadness that always accompanied visits to such places. The animals were magnificent, each one a testament to the infinite creativity of the universe, but many showed signs of stress and displacement. Creatures meant to soar through methane storms were grounded in artificial habitats. Pack hunters who should have roamed vast territories were isolated in individual cells. The guide, who had introduced herself as Lyrian, noticed his expression. You seem troubled by our exhibits. I assure you, we maintain the highest standards of care. I'm sure you do, Keum replied diplomatically. But comfort and contentment aren't always the same thing. They passed enclosures containing creatures that defied imagination, a being that existed partially in another dimension, appearing as shifting geometric patterns to the naked eye, a massive insectoid whose carapace had evolved to grow living gardens across its surface, a graceful, ethereal creature that seemed to be made of solid music, its form changing in harmony with the ambient sounds around it. Each time they paused, Keum felt that same pull, though none as strong as what he had felt viewing the Carapus hologram. Several of the creatures showed interest in him as well. The geometric being's patterns shifted more rapidly when he approached, and the music creature's form brightened noticeably. Interesting, Lyrian murmured, observing these interactions. You have an unusual effect on them. Are you a xenobiologist? Of sorts, Keum said, which was not entirely untrue. The Druids of Earth studied the connections between all living things, though their methods were quite different from conventional science. They finally reached the central hall of the exhibition, a vast circular chamber with walls that stretched up into shadow. The air here hummed with the power of multiple containment fields, each one maintaining a delicate balance between visibility for the guests and security for everyone's safety. But all other enclosures paled in comparison to the massive installation that dominated the center of the hall. The Carapus's containment unit was a masterpiece of engineering, a transparent cylinder nearly 50 meters in diameter and 30 meters high, surrounded by multiple layers of energy barriers that created a faint shimmer in the air. Warning signs in dozens of languages surrounded the viewing platform, and automated systems constantly monitored the containment field strength. And within this technological marvel coiled the most magnificent and terrifying creature Keum had ever laid eyes upon. The hologram had not done the Carapus justice. Its scales caught and reflected the exhibition lighting in ways that created patterns of shadow and brilliance across its massive form. Each individual scale was easily the size of Keum's hand, and they overlapped in a design that spoke of both beauty and lethality. The serpent's body was thicker than an ancient earth oak, tapering to a tail that ended in what appeared to be a cluster of natural spikes. But it was the creature's head that drew all attention. Nearly 3 meters long and perfectly triangular, it contained eyes the size of dinner plates that glowed with an inner fire. When the Carapus opened its mouth, as it did frequently, testing the boundaries of its containment, it revealed fangs longer than Keum's arm, hollow and clearly designed for the delivery of massive quantities of venom. The crowd around the viewing platform maintained a respectful distance, even though they were protected by multiple layers of energy barriers. Parents held children close, and even the most experienced travelers watched with a mixture of awe and barely contained fear. The Carapus moved with a restless energy, its massive coils constantly shifting as it tested every centimeter of its containment. Its strikes against the energy barriers came at irregular intervals, each one causing the crowd to gasp and step back despite the impossibility of the creature reaching them. Keum approached the nearest barrier, feeling that pull in his chest now so strong it was almost physical. As he drew closer, the creature's behavior changed subtly. Its restless movements slowed, and those enormous, intelligent eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made several nearby visitors uncomfortable enough to move away. "Remarkable," Lyrian whispered, her markings now pulsing a steady gold. "I've never seen it focus on a single individual like that." Keum barely heard her. Standing just meters away from the galaxy's most feared creature, he felt no fear, only a profound sadness and recognition. In those ancient eyes, he saw not a monster, but a fellow being trapped far from home, surrounded by creatures who saw it only as a thing to be feared and controlled. The Carapus slowly uncoiled a portion of its massive length, bringing its head closer to the barrier near where Keum stood. The crowd murmured nervously, but Keum remained still, holding the creature's gaze. In that moment, standing before the most dangerous predator in known space, a 15-year-old human boy from Earth did something that no galactic database had ever recorded. He smiled. It was not a smile of fear or bravado, but one of genuine understanding and compassion. And for the first time in the 5 cycles since its capture, the Carapus stopped its restless movement and simply watched, its head tilted slightly in what almost looked like curiosity. The crowd fell silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Even the automated warning system seemed to pause, as if the ancient serpent's sudden stillness had somehow confused their programming. Keum raised his hand slowly, palm open, and pressed it gently against the containment barrier. The energy field was warm against his skin, but he could feel something else, a faint resonance, as if the creature on the other side was somehow reaching back. "Young human," Lyrian's voice was barely a whisper, "what you're doing, this has never happened before." But Keum's attention was entirely focused on the Carapus, on the ancient intelligence behind those enormous eyes, and on the connection he could feel forming between them despite all the barriers that separated them. The song that calms the storm. The silence in the central hall stretched on, broken only by the quiet hum of containment systems and the distant murmur of other exhibition areas. Keum could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him, but his attention remained focused entirely on the magnificent creature before him. The Carapus had not moved for several minutes now, an unprecedented stillness that was beginning to draw the attention of exhibition security. Keum could see uniformed figures moving at the edges of his vision, speaking into communication devices with expressions of confusion and growing concern. "The behavioral sensors are reading as completely stable," he heard one technician report to another. "No aggressive indicators at all. It's calm." Calm was not a word typically associated with the Carapus. The creature's psychological profile indicated constant states of agitation, aggression, and territorial stress. Its few hours of rest came only after exhausting itself through failed attempts to breach its containment. But now, with its massive head only meters away from a young human, the serpent exhibited a serenity that defied all scientific understanding. Keum could feel something stirring within him, a warmth that he recognized from his training on Earth. His grandmother had called it, the harmony, the ability to resonate with the emotional frequency of other living beings. It was a rare gift, even among Druids, and one that required great discipline to master. Slowly, Keum began to hum. The sound was low and melodious, barely audible above the ambient noise of the exhibition hall. It was an ancient tune his grandfather had taught him, passed down through generations of Earth Druids, a song meant to carry messages of peace and understanding across the barriers between species. The effect was immediate and profound. The Carapus's massive eyes seemed to widen slightly, and its head moved even closer to the barrier. Its forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air with obvious interest. Around the viewing platform, the crowd had gone completely silent, as if the humming carried some quality that demanded absolute attention. "Impossible," breathed an elderly Andromedian scholar who had been taking detailed notes. "The acoustic frequency patterns shouldn't affect a creature from an entirely different evolutionary branch." But Keum's teachers had always insisted that the druidic chants worked on levels deeper than ordinary science could measure. Sound was merely the carrier wave for something far more fundamental, the expression of one soul's peaceful intent toward another. Lyrian, the exhibition guide, watched in fascination as her biomonitors registered the changes in both the human boy and the ancient serpent. Both showed remarkably synchronized patterns of brain activity, heart rate, and bioelectric fields. "How long have you been studying interspecies communication?" she asked quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever was happening. Keum paused his humming briefly to respond. "All my life, in one way or another." The ancient song resumed, its gentle vibration seeming to fill the space between him and the Carapus. The great serpent began to move again, but this time its movement was different. Instead of the restless coiling and striking that had characterized its behavior for 5 cycles, the Carapus began to sway gently in time with Keum's humming. Its massive body created slow, hypnotic patterns as it moved, scales catching the light like living jewels. A small child in the crowd pointed excitedly. "Look! It's dancing!" And indeed, there was something almost choreographed about the serpent's movements. It was as if the creature was responding to music only it and Keum could truly hear, participating in a performance that transcended the boundaries of species and understanding. Exhibition security had arrived in force, but their captain, a grizzled veteran of multiple species conflicts, seemed uncertain how to proceed. Protocol demanded immediate intervention when any creature showed unusual behavior, but the readings all indicated decreasing rather than increasing danger levels. "Sir," one of his subordinates reported, "containment fields are holding steady. The creature shows no signs of aggression. If anything, stress indicators are at the lowest levels we've ever recorded." The captain studied the scene before him, a young human humming softly while one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators swayed gently in apparent contentment. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this scenario. Continue monitoring, he decided. But be ready for immediate containment protocol if anything changes. Meanwhile, word of the extraordinary display was spreading throughout the exhibition. Visitors abandoned other attractions to crowd into the central hall, creating a growing audience for what was being whispered about as the impossible taming of the Carapus. Scientists, diplomats, and xenobiologists pushed through the crowd, instruments and recording devices in hand. Dr. Tellux, the exhibition's chief xenobiologist, arrived with his full research team, their faces showing mixtures of excitement and disbelief. "Maintain safe distance," Dr. Tellux instructed his team as they set up their equipment. "Document everything, but do not interfere. We may be witnessing the first recorded case of successful interspecies empathic contact with a Carapus." As Keum continued his ancient song, he became aware of changes beyond the serpent's behavior. He could feel the emotional atmosphere of the entire hall shifting. The fear and tension that had dominated the space were gradually being replaced by something else: wonder, curiosity, and even a strange sense of peace. The Carapus, meanwhile, had moved into a position that brought its head as close to Keum as the containment barrier would allow. Its enormous eyes, which had struck fear into countless hearts, now held an expression that was unmistakably gentle. The creature's breathing had slowed and deepened, and the aggressive tension that had marked every line of its body had melted away. "It recognizes you," Lyrian whispered in amazement. "Somehow, it knows you're different from the others." Keum felt the truth of her words. Through the harmony of his druidic training, he could sense the Carapus's emotional state. Beneath layers of confusion, anger, and pain, he felt something he hadn't expected to find: loneliness. The great serpent was intelligent, perhaps more so than many of the species that had designated it a mere beast. It understood that it was far from home, surrounded by beings who saw it only as a threat to be contained rather than a living creature with its own needs and desires. For 5 long cycles, it had raged against its imprisonment, not out of mere animal frustration, but from a deep, conscious understanding of what had been taken from it. And now, for the first time since its capture, it had encountered a being who looked at it without fear or hatred. Keum gradually allowed his humming to fade, but the connection he had established with the Carapus remained strong. The serpent continued its gentle swaying for a few moments longer, then slowly lowered its massive head to rest against the containment barrier directly in front of where Keum stood. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Even separated by impenetrable energy fields, the gesture was unmistakably one of trust and affection. The most dangerous creature in the known galaxy was attempting to touch the young human who had shown it kindness. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Tellux announced to anyone within earshot. "In all our studies, the Carapus has never shown anything approaching affectionate behavior toward any sentient being. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies psychology." But for Keum, this moment wasn't about scientific breakthroughs or academic recognition. Standing before the Carapus, feeling the weight of its ancient gaze and sensing the profound intelligence behind those enormous eyes, he understood something that no amount of research had revealed. The Carapus wasn't just a dangerous predator. It was a being capable of complex emotions, suffering, and, as he had just witnessed, gratitude and affection. As exhibition officials huddled in urgent conferences and scientists excitedly compared readings from their instruments, Keum pressed his hand against the containment barrier once more. The energy field hummed against his palm, but he imagined he could feel the warmth of the great serpent's presence on the other side. "I see you," he whispered, so quietly that only the Carapus could hear. "I understand that you're more than what they think you are." The serpent's response was subtle but unmistakable. Its eyes seemed to brighten slightly, and its massive body settled into a more relaxed position. For the first time in 5 cycles, the Carapus appeared to be at peace. The implications of what had just occurred were staggering. If a human boy from Earth could establish this kind of connection with the galaxy's most feared creature, what other assumptions about interspecies relationships might need to be reconsidered? But as Keum prepared to step away from the barrier, he felt the Carapus's distress begin to rise again. The serpent lifted its head, following his movement with obvious concern. It was clear that the creature did not want this unprecedented contact to end. Neither, Keum realized, did he. The bond formed between them was unlike anything he had experienced before. It was deeper than the connections he had made with Earth animals, charged with an intensity that seemed to resonate through every fiber of his being. As he looked into the Carapus's eyes, Keum made a decision that would change everything. He would find a way to be with this magnificent creature again. Breaking boundaries. The following morning brought unprecedented chaos to the Galactic Fauna exhibition. Word of the previous day's events had spread across the galactic communication networks faster than a solar flare. Representatives from major universities, government agencies, and interspecies councils were arriving by the hour, all demanding to witness or study the human Carapus incident. Keum arrived at the exhibition before the official opening, having obtained a researcher's pass through Lyrian's intervention. She had spoken with Dr. Tellux through the night, convincing him that allowing the human boy to return might provide invaluable scientific data. "The moment you established contact with the Carapus, you became the most important person in xenobiological research," Lyrian explained as she led him through corridors bustling with activity. "Everyone wants to understand how it happened." But Keum wasn't interested in becoming a scientific curiosity. His only desire was to return to the magnificent creature that had touched his soul in ways he was still trying to comprehend. The central hall was dramatically different from the day before. Banks of monitoring equipment surrounded the Carapus's containment unit, operated by teams of scientists from a dozen different species. Security forces had tripled, and new warning barriers kept crowds at a much greater distance from the serpent's enclosure. The Carapus itself appeared agitated once again. It moved restlessly within its containment, occasionally striking at the barriers with the frustrated fury that had characterized its behavior for the past 5 cycles. Its eyes constantly scanned the crowd, as if searching for something, or someone. "It's been like this since approximately 2 hours after you left yesterday," Dr. Tellux informed Keum. "All the calm you induced dissipated rapidly once you departed." Keum felt his heart clench at the sight of the creature's distress. Through their brief connection, he had sensed the depths of the Carapus's imprisonment, not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. To taste freedom from that isolation only to have it disappear again must have been torment. "I need to get closer," Keum said, observing the new barriers that kept spectators much farther from the containment unit. Dr. Tellux's expression was conflicted. He was a scientist first, driven by curiosity and the potential for groundbreaking discovery. But he was also responsible for the safety of everyone in the exhibition. The additional precautions are necessary, he explained. Your presence yesterday created an interaction we don't fully understand. Until we can predict and control the variables. You can't control this, Keum interrupted gently. What happened between the Carapus and me isn't something that can be replicated in a laboratory. It's about recognition. Understanding. Trust. Trust. Dr. Telex's secondary pair of arms gestured emphatically. Young human, this creature's venom could eliminate every living being in this hall within minutes. Its physical strength could crush emergency response vehicles. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford. But even as the xenobiologist spoke, the Carapus had noticed Keum's arrival. The great serpent's agitated movement ceased, and its massive head turned toward him despite the increased distance between them. The change was immediate and unmistakable, the creature's aggressive posturing melted away, replaced by an obvious eagerness to reconnect. Look at it, Keum said quietly. It's not trying to threaten anyone. It just wants to understand why I left. The assembled scientists murmured among themselves as they observed the Carapus's behavior change. Readings on their instruments showed the same patterns as the previous day, decreased stress indicators, stabilized aggression markers, and most remarkably, brain activity patterns that suggested heightened cognitive function. It's thinking more clearly when you're here, Dr. Telux observed, studying the data feeds. Whatever connection you've established appears to enhance its intelligence rather than diminish it. This revelation sent whispers of excitement through the scientific community. Traditional assumptions about the Carapus's mental capabilities were being challenged by real-time data that none of them could explain. Keum began moving toward the containment unit, navigating through the maze of equipment and personnel. The crowd parted before him, everyone eager to witness another unprecedented interaction. The Carapus tracked his movement intently, its body gradually settling into the same peaceful coils that had amazed everyone the day before. When Keum reached the new barrier, still several meters farther from the containment unit than he had been previously, he could see the disappointment in the serpent's enormous eyes. The Carapus moved closer to the energy barriers on its side, clearly wanting to minimize the distance between them. Without hesitation, Keum began to hum again. The ancient druidic melody filled the hall, carrying with it the same peaceful intent that had worked such magic the day before. But this time, the Carapus's response suggested frustration along with recognition. The creature swayed gently to the rhythm but continued to press against its containment, seeking greater proximity. It's not enough, Keum told Dr. Telux, who had approached to observe more closely. The barriers we've placed between us are causing it distress. It needs real contact. Absolutely not, Dr. Telux replied immediately. The primary containment field is all that stands between that creature and what? Keum challenged. Yesterday it had the perfect opportunity to attack when everyone was distracted by our interaction. Instead, it chose to be gentle. To share a moment of peace. You're asking me to risk not just your life, but the lives of everyone in this facility. Keum looked directly into the scientist's compound eyes. I'm asking you to trust that some connections transcend species and fear. As they debated, the Carapus became increasingly agitated. Its movements grew more erratic, and it began producing a low, rumbling sound that resonated through the containment structure. The sound was alien and complex, carrying emotional undertones that even the translation systems couldn't fully interpret. It's calling to me, Keum realized. It's trying to communicate. Dr. Telux consulted with his monitoring teams, reviewing streams of data in real time. The vocalizations are unlike anything we've recorded before. The frequency patterns suggest language structures. Of course they do, Keum said. It's been trying to tell you something for 5 cycles, but no one's been listening. The rumbling calls from the Carapus grew more urgent, and its movements became increasingly agitated. It was clear that the serpent was becoming frustrated by its inability to reach the human who had shown it such unexpected kindness. Sir, a security officer reported to Dr. Tellux, stress indicators are beginning to climb. If this continues, we may need to implement calming protocols. No, Keum said firmly. Sedatives will only make things worse. It needs understanding, not chemical suppression. As if responding to his words, the Carapus suddenly reared up to its full height within the containment unit. At nearly 15 meters tall, it was a sight that sent spectators scrambling backward in renewed fear. But its actions weren't threatening. Instead, it placed its massive head against the topmost section of the energy barrier and began producing a different sound. This new vocalization was softer, more melodic, almost like "It's trying to sing," Lyrian breathed in wonder. "The Carapus is attempting to mimic your humming." The realization struck everyone simultaneously. The galaxy's most feared predator was trying to communicate using the same peaceful tones that Keum had offered it. The creature's version was alien and strange, produced by a vocal system evolved for entirely different purposes, but the intent was unmistakable. It was singing back to him. Keum felt tears welling in his eyes. Through their brief connection, he had sensed the Carapus's intelligence, but this demonstration of learning and creativity revealed depths that no one had imagined. The Serpent wasn't just responding to peaceful overtures, it was trying to create them itself. "Dr. Tellux," Keum said, his voice thick with emotion, "please. Let me get closer. It's trying so hard to bridge the gap between us. Don't let fear destroy this chance for real communication." The xenobiologist looked at the massive creature producing its alien song, at the readings showing unprecedented levels of cognitive activity, and at the young human who had somehow awakened this hidden aspect of one of the galaxy's most dangerous beings. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Tellux made his decision. "Deactivate the outer barriers," he commanded. "Full monitoring protocols. Emergency containment on standby. But, let's see what happens." As the additional barriers flickered out of existence, Keum moved closer to the primary containment unit. The Carapus's alien song grew stronger, more confident, and its massive body settled into the graceful swaying patterns from the day before. This time, when Keum placed his hand against the containment field, he felt more than just the hum of energy. He sensed the Carapus's desperate desire to make physical contact, to confirm that this connection was real. And in that moment, looking into the ancient eyes of the galaxy's most feared creature as it sang its strange, beautiful song, Keum made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Dr. Tellux," he said quietly, "I want you to deactivate the primary containment field." The silence that followed was deafening. The impossible trust. The silence that followed Keum's request seemed to stretch across the entire galaxy. Every being in the central hall stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what the young human had just asked. Even the Carapus seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, its alien song trailing off into expectant quiet. Dr. Tellux's 4 eyes blinked in a complex pattern that indicated extreme stress in his species. "You're asking me to remove the only barrier between you and certain death. I'm asking you to trust what we've both witnessed," Keum replied steadily. "The Carapus has had 2 days to show aggression toward me. Instead, it's learned to sing." Around them, security teams were already moving into position. Emergency containment systems hummed to life, ready to deploy at the first sign of danger. Medical teams stood by with anti-venom protocols, though everyone knew that if the Carapus chose to attack, there would be no time for treatment. "The liability alone," Dr. Tellux began. "I accept full responsibility," Keum interrupted. "I'm asking you to let me prove that understanding is more powerful than fear." Lyrian, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly stepped forward. "I'll support the decision," she announced. Her silver markings were pulsing rapidly, indicating high stress, but her voice was firm. "As senior behavioral analyst for this facility, I've observed interactions that defy every model we have for this creature's psychology." "You're both insane," muttered the security captain, but he made no move to intervene. The readings from his teams all showed the same thing: the Carapus exhibited no aggressive markers when in proximity to the human boy. Dr. Tellux looked at the assembled crowd of scientists, diplomats, and journalists. The entire galactic community was watching. Whatever happened next would either mark a breakthrough in interspecies relations or become a tragedy of historic proportions. "If I do this," he said slowly, "it will be with every safety protocol active except the primary barrier. The moment, the absolute moment, anything goes wrong, the containment field reactivates automatically." Keum nodded, understanding the weight of what was being offered. "That's all I ask." The Carapus seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. Its massive head lifted, watching intently as Dr. Tellux moved to the control panel. The creature's movements were calm but alert, as if it too understood that something momentous was about to occur. "All teams, final positions," Dr. Tellux announced into his communicator. "Initiating primary containment deactivation in 10 seconds. Full emergency protocols are active. 10, 9, 8. The crowd held its breath. Some species' involuntary fear responses activated, releasing pheromones that created a cocktail of terror in the air. 7, 6, 5. The Carapus lowered its head to floor level, positioning itself in the least threatening posture possible, a sign of intelligence that amazed everyone present. 4, 3, 2. Keum stepped closer to the containment unit, his hand raised peacefully. 1. The energy barrier shimmered once and vanished. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The Carapus, now free to exit its containment for the first time in 5 cycles, remained perfectly still. The only sound was the collective intake of breath from hundreds of onlookers. Then, with movements so gentle they seemed impossible for a creature of such size, the Carapus began to emerge from its enclosure. The Serpent's head appeared first, moving slowly and deliberately. Its enormous eyes remained fixed on Keum, who stood utterly calm despite being face to face with the galaxy's most feared predator. The creature's neck followed, each movement controlled and peaceful. Behind Keum, he could hear the quiet mechanical sounds of weapon systems charging and medical equipment being activated. But his attention was entirely focused on the magnificent being before him. The Carapus's head was now less than 2 meters from Keum's position. Up close, the creature was even more beautiful than he had imagined. Each scale was a work of art, reflecting light in complex patterns. The famous fangs, while undeniably deadly, were part of a facial structure that conveyed intelligence and even, surprisingly, a kind of gentleness. "Hello," Keum said softly, as if greeting an old friend. The Carapus tilted its massive head slightly, studying him with obvious fascination. Then, moving with the same careful deliberation it had shown throughout, the Serpent lowered its head until it was level with Keum's. The crowd gasped as the creature's snout came within centimeters of the human boy. At this distance, a single strike would be instantaneous and fatal. Every weapon in the hall was trained on the Carapus, ready to respond to the slightest aggressive movement. But instead of attacking, the Carapus did something unprecedented. It began to hum. The alien song it had been practicing filled the air, a deep, resonant melody that seemed to harmonize with the very structure of the building. The creature's eyes never left Keum's face as it sang, and in those ancient depths, the boy saw emotions that most of the galaxy refused to acknowledge in mere beasts: hope, curiosity, and something that could only be called affection. Keum smiled and began to hum along, his human voice blending with the Carapus's alien tones in a duet that no composer could have imagined. The two melodies intertwined, creating something that was neither fully human nor fully alien, but somehow both. Around them, the atmosphere in the hall began to change. The sharp scent of fear started to dissipate, replaced by something harder to define, wonder, perhaps, or the recognition that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Dr. Tellux watched his instruments with growing amazement. "Bioelectric readings are showing synchronization between both subjects," he reported quietly. "It's as if they're achieving some form of neurological harmony." "How is this possible?" asked a Zentorian scientist, her multifaceted eyes reflecting her confusion. "The neural structures are completely incompatible." "Perhaps compatibility isn't about biology," Lyrian suggested. Perhaps it's about intention. As their duet continued, the Carapus slowly extended one massive coil of its body, moving it carefully around Keum in what was unmistakably an embrace. The gesture was so gentle that the boy felt only the warmth of the creature's scales against his back. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the most dangerous predator in known space held the human boy in what could only be described as a hug. The Carapus's full attention was focused on Keum, its deadly capabilities temporarily set aside in favor of this unprecedented display of affection. "I see you too," Keum whispered, reaching up to gently touch the scales on the creature's snout. The Carapus's eyes closed briefly at the contact, an expression of contentment that resembled what mammals might call a smile. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle coils of a creature that the galaxy feared above all others, Keum felt a connection deeper than anything he had experienced before. Through their shared song and touch, he could sense the Carapus's thoughts and emotions, its loneliness during 5 cycles of imprisonment, its joy at finding someone who saw it as more than a monster, and its desperate desire for understanding. But he also sensed something else, a profound intelligence that had been underestimated by every scientific study. The Carapus wasn't just a predator or even a highly advanced animal. It was a being capable of philosophy, creativity, and complex emotional relationships. "What are you thinking about?" Keum asked softly, though he wasn't sure the creature would understand the concept of questions. The Carapus's response surprised everyone. It gently disentangled itself from their embrace and moved to one wall of its former containment unit. Using the tip of its tail with remarkable precision, it began to create marks in the accumulated dust on the floor. The marks weren't random, they were deliberate, forming patterns that resembled symbols or even letters. As the crowd watched in growing excitement, the Carapus created a complex design that seemed to tell a story in images. "It's writing," Dr. Tellux breathed. "The Carapus is literate." The implications were staggering. The creature that had been classified as a dangerous beast was demonstrating not just intelligence, but cultural development, artistic expression, and linguistic capability. Keum studied the symbols the Carapus had created, feeling somehow that he should understand their meaning. As he focused on the patterns, something in his mind seemed to click into place. "Home," he said suddenly. "You're showing me your home." The Carapus's eyes brightened, and it added more details to its dust drawings. Soon, an entire landscape emerged, towering crystalline formations, flowing pools of liquid that might have been water or something more exotic, and shapes that suggested other creatures similar to itself. "You're not alone," Keum realized. "There are others like you." The serpent's expression grew sad, and it pointed with its tail to a single figure separated from the others in its drawing. The message was clear: it had been taken from its family, its community, its entire world. For the first time since the containment field had been lowered, Keum felt a flash of anger, not at the Carapus, but at the situation that had brought it here. This magnificent, intelligent being had been ripped away from everything it knew and loved, displayed as a curiosity for the entertainment of species that refused to acknowledge its personhood. "I'm sorry," he said, placing both hands on the creature's snout. "I'm so sorry that this happened to you." The Carapus seemed to understand not just his words but the emotion behind them. It pressed gently against his hands, a gesture of acceptance and gratitude that brought tears to Keum's eyes. Around them, the assembled crowd had fallen completely silent. The implications of what they had witnessed would take time to fully process, but one thing was clear: everything they thought they knew about the Carapus, and perhaps about interspecies relationships in general, would need to be reconsidered. But their moment of connection was interrupted by an urgent announcement over the facility's communication system. "All personnel, please be advised, a hegemony battle cruiser has just entered Saurian space. They are demanding the immediate return of what they call their captured prey. Estimated arrival at the station, 1 hour." The Carapus's entire demeanor changed at the announcement. Its peaceful posture shifted to one of alert tension, and for the first time since leaving its containment, it showed signs of the fear that had been masked by 5 cycles of rage. It understood. The beings who had taken it from its home were coming to reclaim it. And this time, they might not be interested in keeping it alive. The choice that changes everything. The arrival of the Hegemony battle cruiser sent shockwaves through the exhibition. Long-range scanners confirmed what everyone feared: the massive warship was heavily armed and bearing diplomatic immunity flags that made resistance nearly impossible. Keum felt the Carapus's terror through their connection, a fear so profound it threatened to overwhelm his own senses. The great Serpent pressed closer to him, seeking comfort in the only being that had ever shown it genuine kindness. "What do they want with it?" Keum asked Dr. Tellux, though part of him already knew the answer. The xenobiologist's expression was grim. 5 cycles ago, the Hegemony claimed the Carapus was a danger to shipping lanes. But our intelligence suggests they've been developing biological weapons programs. A creature whose venom can kill at the molecular level. He didn't need to finish the sentence. "We can't let them take it back," Keum said firmly. Not knowing what they plan to do. "Young human," Dr. Tellux replied sadly, "we have no choice. The Hegemony has legal claim to the creature. Our facility operates under galactic law, we cannot refuse their demands without precipitating an interspecies conflict." But Keum wasn't listening to legal arguments. Through his connection with the Carapus, he could feel the creature's memories of its capture, the violence, the pain, the brutal separation from its family. He had seen its drawings in the dust, understood its intelligence and capacity for love. The thought of returning it to those who saw it only as a weapon was unbearable. "There has to be another way," he insisted. Lyrian, who had been quietly consulting her data pad, looked up with an expression of sudden realization. "Actually," she said slowly, "there might be." All eyes turned to her as she explained. Galactic law does include provisions for contested custody in cases involving sentient beings. If the Carapus can be legally recognized as a person rather than property, it would have the right to choose its own destiny, Dr. Tellux finished, his 4 eyes widening with the implications. But proving sentience according to galactic law requires demonstrating complex cognitive abilities, cultural development, and capacity for self-determination. Keum looked at the magnificent creature beside him, at the artistic patterns it had drawn in the dust, at the gentle intelligence in its ancient eyes. "It's already done all of that. But will the Galactic Council accept the evidence? And more importantly, will they act on it before the Hegemony arrives?" As if responding to the urgency in their voices, the Carapus began moving toward its dust drawings. With careful precision, it began adding new elements to the design, symbols that seemed to represent the exhibition, the gathered beings, and prominently, Keum himself. "It's showing us that it chooses to be here," Lyrian breathed. "It's making a deliberate decision about its own fate." Word of the situation spread rapidly through the facility. Scientists abandoned their equipment to gather around the Carapus's artistic display. Diplomats made urgent calls to their home governments. Journalists documented every moment, knowing they were witnessing history in the making. Dr. Tellux worked frantically to compile evidence of the Carapus's intelligence. Brain scans showing higher cognitive function. Recordings of its musical communication attempts. Images of its symbolic art. Everything that proved it was more than the beast its captors claimed it to be. But time was running short. The Hegemony cruiser would arrive within the hour, and their representatives were notorious for their ruthless efficiency in reclaiming what they considered their property. As the tension in the hall reached a breaking point, the Carapus made a decision that surprised everyone. It moved away from Keum toward the center of the hall, where it could be seen by all the assembled beings. Rising to its full height, the great Serpent began to speak. Not in the alien song it had shared with Keum, but in recognizable galactic standard, words formed with obvious effort by a vocal system never designed for such sounds, but words nonetheless. "I am not beast," the Carapus said, its voice a deep rumble that echoed through the hall. "I think. I feel. I choose." The silence that followed was absolute. Every translator in the facility confirmed the same thing: the galaxy's most feared predator had just declared its own personhood in terms that no court could ignore. How long have you been able to speak? Dr. Tellux asked, his scientific excitement overriding his amazement. The Carapus turned its gaze to him, considering the question. Always, understand. Speaking, difficult. No one, listen, before. The revelation struck like a thunderbolt. For 5 cycles, the Carapus had understood every word spoken around it, had comprehended its situation completely, but had been unable to communicate with beings who saw it only as a monster to be contained. Why didn't you try to speak before? Keum asked gently. The great serpent's eyes found his, and in them he saw depths of pain and wisdom that spoke of patient endurance beyond most beings' comprehension. Hope was gone, it replied simply. Until you. The emotional weight of those words settled over the assembly like a blanket. This being, capable of thought and feeling, had spent 5 cycles in despair, believing itself forever isolated from understanding. Only Keum's recognition of its personhood had given it the hope necessary to attempt communication. What is your name? Dr. Tellux asked, his recorder capturing every moment. The Carapus moved to its dust drawings and added a new symbol, complex, beautiful, and unmistakably a representation of itself. In your sounds. It said carefully, call me Seraph. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The creature they had known by a name that inspired terror had chosen to call itself by a word meaning, burning one, a reference not to destruction, but to the sacred fire of enlightenment. Before anyone could ask another question, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The hegemony battle cruiser had arrived. Seraph's entire body tensed, coiling in preparation for a threat it knew it couldn't fight. But this time, it wasn't alone. Keum stepped forward, placing his hand on the great serpent's snout in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. We won't let them take you, he promised. Dr. Tellux was already transmitting their evidence to the Galactic Council, requesting an emergency session to consider Seraph's petition for personhood. But everyone knew the legal process could take days or weeks, time they didn't have. The exhibition's communication system crackled to life with an incoming message from the hegemony vessel. Saurian facility, this is Commander Vex of the Hegemony Enforcement Division. We are here to reclaim our biological asset designated Carapus 7. Prepare for immediate transfer. Dr. Tellux activated the reply system with shaking hands. Commander Vex, we must inform you that the being you refer to has petitioned for recognition as a sentient person under galactic law. We cannot transfer custody until this matter is resolved by the proper authorities. The silence that followed was ominous. When Commander Vex spoke again, his voice carried a coldness that chilled everyone present. Doctor, you have 1 cycle to surrender our property, or we will take it by force. The hegemony does not recognize the personhood of biological weapons. The connection terminated, leaving the assembly in stunned silence. Outside the facility, they could see the massive shadow of the battle cruiser blotting out Sauria's twin suns. But Seraph, despite the terror Keum could feel radiating from the great serpent, slowly raised its head and spoke with a dignity that silenced all fear. I am not weapon, it declared to the cosmos. I am Seraph. I choose freedom. As those words echoed through the hall, beings from dozens of species made their own choice. Scientists, diplomats, journalists, and ordinary visitors moved to form a protective circle around Seraph. They couldn't match the hegemony's military might, but they could bear witness to what was right. Keum felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what was happening. An entire gathering of galactic citizens was choosing to protect one being's right to determine its own fate, risking conflict with one of the most powerful militaristic organizations in known space. Dr. Tellux stepped forward, his voice carrying across the hall. Let the record show that the being known as Seraph, formerly designated Carapus 7, has formally requested recognition of its personhood and the right to choose its own destiny. We, as representatives of 37 different species and 14 governmental bodies, stand witness to this declaration and pledge our support for its recognition under galactic law. One by one, the assembled beings added their voices to the declaration. Species that had warred with each other for centuries stood united in support of a creature they had feared only hours before. As the formal declarations echoed through the hall, Seraph turned to Keum, lowering its great head until they were eye to eye. "Thank you," it said simply. "For seeing me." Keum placed both hands on either side of Seraph's massive head, feeling the warmth of its scales and the genuine affection in its ancient gaze. "Thank you," he replied, "for teaching me that understanding is always possible." Outside, the Hegemony battle cruiser prepared for what would later be known as the Siege of Soria. But inside the exhibition hall, surrounded by beings who had chosen hope over fear, a boy and a serpent had already won the most important victory of all. They had proven that consciousness, compassion, and the courage to see beyond appearances could transform the galaxy itself. As emergency messages flew between worlds and the Galactic Council prepared for the most important session in its history, Keum and Seraph sat together in peaceful communion, their friendship a beacon of what was possible when fear was replaced by understanding. The battle for Seraph's freedom was far from over, but in that moment, surrounded by allies they had never expected to find, both human and serpent knew they had already achieved something far more valuable than victory. They had found each other. The end.